So we've done all the silver augments, we've done all the gold augments, and now there are only 42 prismatic augments, and technically, since yesterday, now there are only 40 prismatic augments, so this one should be the easiest. That being said, prismatic augments are also the wackiest, but without further ado, let's jump right into the video. Now the first augment we have is one that is returning in Accelerating Sorcery, which when you cast an ability, it grants you 9 ability haste. This effect stacks infinitely until the end of the round, and honestly, this augment is really good early game, but kind of sucks late game as fights get faster. Having a lot of ability haste is nice, but if the enemies just run up and kill you before you can actually use those abilities initially, then it isn't as good. The best way to use this augment usually is to try to stall the rounds as much as possible. If you're playing like a very cheesy champion such as Shaco, to constantly be going into your clones, to constantly be dropping down your traps, then Accelerating Sorcery is a lot better. Playing a champion like Karma, Accelerating Sorcery is actually surprisingly good because you can constantly be healing with your Empowered W, constantly just trying to spam out your shields, keeping you alive, going for a little more of a tanky build. That is a champion I've found a lot of success with on Accelerating Sorcery in the early and even in the late game. If you're a champion that can't really just use abilities without having any targets specifically, kind of like a Teemo for instance, who needs like somebody to actually blind with his Q in order to stack it, you can stack it kind of with your W and your ultimate, but that isn't really fast enough in my opinion, especially in the late game. So for that reason, I definitely think it's OP early and mid game, and can be meh late game, but on certain champions it is still really strong. If you're playing a champion that has a ton of CC and is really tanky, then again, Accelerating Sorcery is quite good. A champion like Leona, for instance, is one of the best ones as well. But a lot of the other tanks that just have a ton of health actually can die pretty quickly to any of the champions that build on hit, especially because they will also be having a prismatic augment. And the on-hit items just do so much percent health damage that you probably won't be able to use your Accelerating Sorcery before you are dead. Now the next augment we have is Back to Basics, where you gain 35% increased damage, healing, and shielding, and 60 ability haste, but you can no longer cast your ultimate ability. And this augment is pretty strong, but also very niche. Having your ultimate available is very important for most characters. Some characters have terrible ultimates in Arena, where Back to Basics is pretty good on them. Like for instance, TF ult does very little. It just pretty much gives you vision of the bushes if they're in it, or it gives you vision for your teammate if they're looking to do some kind of snipe. Then TF ults are good, but you'd just rather have like Back to Basics, so you have this 35% increased damage. At the end of the day though, a lot of prismatic augments don't really have that much of a cost, while this one has a pretty big cost in losing your ultimate. And a lot of the other prismatic augments are just really strong on their own, with again not having a cost. My problem with Back to Basics is it doesn't really prevent you from getting one shot. If you're playing like a Jhin for instance, who might not be able to use his ultimate in certain fights, so you think Back to Basics will be good, you could still get jumped on it just absolutely one shot before you really are able to use your increased damage, healing, and shielding. Now you have to remember I'm going to be pretty harsh with all the prismatic augments because they aren't really insanely strong, and it would be very easy just to say, oh look, all of these are super insanely incredible, but we just have to compare them to the other options that are out there. Now the next augment we have is Blade Waltz, which replaces your Flee with the summoner spell Blade Waltz, which is pretty much old Fiora ult. And what this does is when you activate it, it dashes around the target enemy champion 8 times, dealing some damage, and applying on-hit effects at 50% effectiveness for each dash, and it grants you untargetability during the entire effect, so you're pretty much immune during this entire ability, which is really nice. And it deals a total of 240 to 1,200 based on level damage. The damage is pretty nice. Oftentimes you'll see people use this either to like avoid big damage that is coming in, or as like a finisher move after using the like QWE and ultimate, because then everything else will be on cooldown, and then they can use the Blade Waltz, have the untargetability, do the extra damage, and then hopefully their other abilities will be back off of cooldown to continue the damage that they will be dealing. Now the fact that the Blade Waltz will apply on-hit effects at 50% effectiveness is insane because again, on-hit items are really incredibly strong. So you're pretty much getting like 4 full procs of on-hits, which is really nice. I'll be putting this augment in the consistently good. In the past, this augment was a bit better in my eyes as the one-shot meta was so prevalent, as Blade Waltz would help you try to avoid like a really powerful Zed ult or Syndra ult or like Kennen coming at you at full speed. But now oftentimes a lot of people are like playing tanks, and this augment isn't as good on tanks. It's not too bad. You can like pretty much take it if you're forced to on any champion. but it is usually better on champions that can build on hit, or champions that are like squishy trying to avoid getting one shot. But again, I think there are some better prismatic augments out there for a lot of champions, so it's a nice one to take, but not something that I'm taking and that I'm feeling like I'm guaranteeing myself a win. We have our 4th augment in a row that we've already seen and can't touch this. What this does is that when you cast your ultimate, it grants you invulnerability for 2 seconds, and it's on an 8-second cooldown. And this augment is definitely useful, but I view it as being kind of weak. It is nice having invincibility, but honestly, wouldn't you rather have Blade Waltz? Sure, you do have to give up your flee, but you don't have to cast your ultimate in order to get the immunity, and you're doing a bunch of damage at the same time. A lot of champions have ultimates that like CC people or kill them, so invulnerability doesn't really matter in that case. This ability could be decent on something like Taric if he wasn't like super duper nerfed to the ground, because you could ult as Taric, become invulnerable, and then have the Taric ult on top of that. So you have these like insanely long frames of invincibility, but there's just not a lot of games where you're like using your ultimate in order to dodge damage, especially because like people can know that once you use the ultimate, use the invulnerability, they can hold all of their spells until you're out of that state in order to kill you. It doesn't really help you deal with the tanks that are really strong, as they kill you over a long period of time. You can also still be CC'd if you're invulnerable, so you're not immune to that. You can still be like peeled away. So there's definitely going to be some instances where you can like win a fight because you have this invulnerability from using your ultimate. If you're playing something that has a low ult cooldown like Corki or Kog'Maw, then you can get a lot of procs of this invulnerability. Just all in all, there's a lot of ways to kind of counter invulnerability, and having to make sure you use your ultimate right at the exact time that you need to so you don't die and so you can avoid a bunch of damage is kind of tricky. So if you're able to do it consistently, then great, this augment is perfect for you, but it just adds a whole nother layer you have to think about when you're playing Arena, which can be quite difficult. Now we have Center of the Universe, which gives you a buffed version of Aurelion Sol's old passive, and what happens is you are now orbited by 6 stars that exist at your attack range, and each star does this damage, which is 5 to 160 based on level, plus 25% bonus AD, plus 15% magic damage to enemies that come into contact with them. And honestly, I've actually not been able to take this augment yet, even though I've had it offered to me a couple times, just because I've seen other augments that I've liked better. I've also seen nearly nobody take this augment, so I thought it was pretty useless. Then actually on a patch on December 11th, they decided to nerf this augment's base damage from 10 to 180 to 5 to 160, again, based on your level at the time. So I guess this augment was performing pretty well, which does honestly surprise me because it doesn't sound that crazy. Maybe because there are 6 stars, the damage just does ramp up pretty heavily. I think my problem with Center of the Universe is that you can just get outranged by the people who are doing this on-hit damage from afar. Then the Center of the Universe damage won't actually matter because you are already dead. Another problem I can see is if tanks are just on top of you constantly, maybe you're not able to get the Center of the Universe damage off on them as well. Kind of similarly to Aurelion Sol in the past, where having to use his W to deal damage was always a bit tricky. In this one, at least, he doesn't have to constantly try to expand it to do like extra damage. So he always has this zone, and it is 6 instead of 4. So there is more potential for him to deal damage. Funnily enough, I actually had this augment in the kind of troll tier when I initially made my tier list. And I'm going to leave it there just because I've never seen anybody take it, and I've never taken it myself just because I feel like there are a lot better options out there. Clearly, Riot Games has seen that this augment is strong enough to receive a nerf, so clearly I am wrong, but I'm going to stick with my guns. I don't think this augment is that incredible. I definitely think there are ways to outplay it. It probably belongs in like the OP early mid game, maybe mid late category. I'm kind of tempted to put it up there, but I just genuinely have never seen anybody take this augment. I'm gonna admit that I'm maybe wrong that it does belong in the OP early mid late category. The reason why I'm not going to put this augment any higher, though, I refuse to, is because the damage isn't percent health damage. So if you're playing against champions with a ton of health, then the damage won't be as impressive, especially because it also does magic damage. So if you're building magic resistance, then Center of the Universe won't be as good. This is one of the augments that you'll just have to let me know in the comments below if you've taken it, if you've had good success with it. Maybe you do agree with me that it is kind of troll, and my theory is that it is good in the early to mid game where you are able to get a lot of these procs off, but then later in the game where you're just getting outranged or just getting CC too much, then this augment might end up not doing too much for you. Back-to-back new augments with Chain Lightning. where dealing damage to an enemy champion also damages the nearest other champion within 1000 units of them for true damage equal to 50% of the damage instance. And this augment, honestly, in my eyes, is pretty game defining. The damage you can see from this augment is absolutely ridiculous. If you're playing like these burn champions like Brand, Teemo, pretty much any poison champion, Malzahar Z, then that damage doing like Liandry's will also jump over to the ally, and it is also doing true damage, so it doesn't have the same problem as the augments that are doing like magic damage or physical damage. And the distance you have to be is within 1000 units, which is not that hard to do compared to like the other augments where it's like 700 range or 400 range or like 300 range. 1000 units is a lot more doable. One instance that I've seen that's definitely very powerful is Teemo with Chain Lightning, because if you step into Shroom and the Teemo has Liandry's, then you and your teammate will both be burning, and it does truly do a ton of damage, especially because it is true damage. If you're playing like an on-hit champion, this is really powerful because you can just pretty much hit anybody you want, like the tank, and as long as the carry is next to the tank, they will be taking a ton of damage, and honestly maybe just dying straight up from the Chain Lightning, which is pretty powerful. I think this augment is absolutely nuts. I think it's pretty good in the early game, and I think it does scale pretty decently into the late game, as dealing damage to both party members is really powerful, especially with the revive meta, where it is more important to like spread out your damage than rather just focus it all on one person, which Chain Lightning does really well. Now we have Chauffeur returning, and honestly I saw it a fair amount when I initially played Arena, but this time the only time I've seen it taken is when I took it on Jhin, and it feels kind of troll and pretty hard to use. What Chauffeur does is that you become attached to your ally, kind of like Yuumi, for the rest of the game, and it grants that ally 100% of your bonus movement speed, as well as granting you 100 ability haste and 50% bonus attack speed. And if you use a dash or blink, it attaches you for 1.5 seconds before attaching you back to your ally. This augment I'm going to put in the can be strong but very niche. If you and your teammate are very coordinated, then Chauffeur can be very powerful, as you can play like an Enchanter plus ADC combo, and either one of them can honestly take the Chauffeur augment, because if the ADC gets it, then they get a bunch of this bonus attack speed, and as long as the support is able to like run around and kind of kite for the ADC, then they can do a bunch of damage with that attack speed. But that being said, if you like have kind of bad range, then Chauffeur can kind of struggle because you might not be able to always attack when you want to. If you're playing the Enchanter, this augment's not bad because it gives you 100 ability haste and you're always next to your carry, kind of like Yuumi. The only problem is you can still be targeted with attacks, so they can go for either person. But you also should be really fast because you're getting like 100% of your bonus movement speed, which is nice. Another weird combo I've seen this on is like Hecarim. He can like press his E and give like a ton of movement speed to his ally, but I don't know how good that is. Hecarim can like detach with his ultimate and try to do a bunch of damage, but that's just kind of like weird wonky combos that I haven't really been able to test or see that often. So definitely some things you can consider with Chauffeur. Definitely feel free to experiment with it. But in general, what I'm going to say about Chauffeur is unless you are in comms with your teammate, this augment is going to really suck, because it's pretty hard to rely on a random to be able to move for two people, especially because unlike Yuumi, you are still able to be targeted. Like for instance, in the past, I played this with somebody on comms, but they kept having me in the circle of death because they just didn't really see my character being in that area. Because they're concentrating on their character, it's kind of hard for you to rely on them to control two characters. So yeah, Chauffeur, very interesting concept, but also pretty difficult Prismatic to make work. Now we have Circle of Death, which I trashed when it was out last time in Arena, because only 40% of the healing you did converted into magic damage, and now it's all the way up to 70%. And honestly, this augment I haven't, again, been able to play that often. I haven't seen it that often. These are the more super duper niche Prismatic augments. This one definitely belongs and can be strong, but very niche. If you find some kind of build combo which gives you a bunch of healing, which then converts into very easy magic damage, then Circle of Death is going to be very powerful. But you have to find like a perfect build. It's definitely going to take a lot of experimentation, and you also have to hope that you are able to do enough damage that the enemies aren't able to just tank it at full value, or that they don't kill you faster than that. I think Circle of Death is really powerful if you have like a bunch of healing augments, because if you have a bunch of like enhancements on your healing, then you might be able to out heal the damage people are doing. So I did play against, I believe, an Urgot that had Circle of Death, and he was able to like absolutely just roll over teams because he had a bunch of healing augments and Moonstone, where he was then able to actually just kill us with Circle of Death. But that was a like one-time occurrence. I haven't played against anything like that. but just because I know that there might be a possibility where Circle of Death can do this, I'm going to put this in the strong but very niche category. This is the kind of augment that you have to look up like guides for, honestly, just to see like what builds people are doing. It's not something I've done myself to really explore, but if you don't have like a very specific build or like very specific augments to combo with this, then I think Circle of Death is actually going to be absolutely useless in Troll, just because you need to really know exactly what you're doing with this augment to make it work. And maybe still even then 70% of that healing being converted to magic damage isn't enough, but hopefully it is. I will say I think Circle of Death is pretty powerful if you're playing against burn champions, because they will constantly be doing damage to you, so you'll constantly have the potential to heal, because if champions aren't doing damage to you, then you can't actually heal anything, as you do need to be dropping in health in order to actually heal. Next up, we have Courage of the Colossus, where when you immobilize enemy champion, it grants you a shield that absorbs 100 to 400 damage based on level, plus 6% maximum health damage. And this has changed a little bit since it first was out, where it was just a flat 200 shield damage plus 6% maximum health, so it was better in the early game. Here you can see in order to reach the 200, you have to be level 7, so it is actually pretty quick, where this augment is just full out buffed. Honestly, this augment for me is super duper OP in the early to mid game, where champions don't have a lot of that on hit damage, so they can't just absolutely shred you. So if you're able to just kind of tank them when you CC them and get this shield, then it is rather nice. I'm not fully sure if this shield can stack on top of itself. Let's see if we're playing a champion with a bunch of immobilizes. Like for instance, like Nautilus, he has his Q, his passive, and his ultimate. If all three instances will keep granting you more and more shields, or like do they have to break the shield in order for it to go away? It doesn't really state it here, which is kind of difficult just to know. I've definitely taken this augment before, but I didn't really look at it enough. If you're fighting against somebody who has this augment and you're really, really struggling, you can maybe consider either you or your teammate going for Serpent's Fang, as will cut the shielding down by 50% if you're a melee character, or 35% if you are a range character, which can be a pretty big deal if that is something you are struggling with, so definitely something to consider. And another reason why I think this augment is a little bit weaker in the later stages of the game is because, again, if you aren't able to CC somebody before they can actually just absolutely one-shot you because of how much on-hit damage they have, like for instance like a Gwen or a Viego or a Varus, then Courage of the Colossus won't really do anything for you. That being said, now that you can stack so much more health, this plus 6% maximum health damage can be really ridiculous. Also because you can get so much CDR if you get like one of those augments that just give you like Q, W, or E CDR, which could be potentially one of your immobilizing spells, then Courage of the Colossus could be absolutely nutty. But again, I just think there are more augments out there that are stronger than Courage of the Colossus. But for tanks, it is a pretty good option. Next up, we have the Augment Dashing, where your abilities with dashes or blinks gain 250 ability haste. And when this first came out, the augment actually only gave you 150 ability haste, but it was on all of your movement abilities, so a little bit differently phrased. This augment is definitely a bit of a strange one. I think it's best on a champion that has a bunch of dashes or blinks. I think maybe the best case scenario would be something like Silas, as I believe his E and W would both be considered dashes and blinks, as his W you like blink towards somebody and his E you're like dashing around. So just having those constantly up is really powerful. It'd be kind of like having accelerating sorcery on steroids. That being said, 250 ability haste isn't the same as having like 250 CDR. You do get like diminishing returns for having a bunch of ability haste, as this doesn't mean you have like 250% less cooldown. I don't know exactly how the math works, but you will still have some sort of a cooldown on your abilities even if you have dashing. This one is again kind of hard to rate because all you are getting is ability haste on like 1 or 2 abilities, probably max. Maybe there's a champion that has 3 dashes or blinks in their kit, which could benefit extra from this. So dashing is kind of like having 2 better gold augments, where like the ones that give you like Q, W, or E cooldown. But I think prismatic augments are like so powerful that you'd rather have something more than that. I'm looking at a champion like Vi. Her ultimate is technically a dash, so maybe that could actually be really good on her, where you can just constantly have your ultimate up as well as your Q. So initially I had this in useful but kind of weak, but I didn't really consider some ultimates maybe being good, where you can have like dashes or blinks having that 250 ability haste, and having your ultimate on such a low cooldown could be really good. So I'm going to put it at can be strong but very niche. This augment is definitely going to be very annoying to play against because mobility spells are so strong, but if you get like locked down with a bunch of CC or just take it down with damage, then dashing won't really matter for you as your game will be over, so there is the potential for that. Now we have Doomsayer, where your abilities apply a curse stack to enemy champions hit for 5 seconds, dealing 0.6% of the target's maximum health magic damage per second over the duration, and this effect stacks infinitely and refreshes with each application. And it also gave you this curse power that for each stack inflicted on targets, gain a permanent 0.21 bonus attack damage or 0.35 ability power every second. And this augment was very similar to Phenomenal Evil, where it was really good on like burn champions. Now some of you might be wanting me to talk about Doomsayer a lot because it's a very cool and interesting augment and wanted me to say how strong it actually is. But it kind of doesn't matter anymore because since December 14th, they've gotten rid of Doomsayer. They've actually gotten rid of all of the cursed augments just because there was way too many problems with them. The biggest problem that you guys actually let me know about that I then was able to test out was that you and your ally, if you both had cursed augments, they would stack each other's augments. So if you had somebody with like Doomsayer and somebody with like Plaguebearer, where they just need to be near somebody in order to get stacking health. The person who had Doomsayer was getting stacking ability power and attack damage just for having your tank be near somebody. It became way too overpowered. That's why I was able to make a YouTube short where I was showcasing that I was playing Jhin with like 22,000 health. Because both me and my gear had Plaguebearer, where we were just getting a bunch of stacking health just for being near enemies, which just got to absolutely ridiculous levels. Now, if they work the way they were supposed to, then I think Doomsayer definitely would still be a game-defining ult. Like, I was watching a brand who had this augment, and without even, like, cheesing the system in any way, he just got, like, 1,400 AP, which is just absolutely ridiculous, and he was doing so much damage. But with all the problems it had with how it could stack with like other curse augments you got previously, or that effect that it stacked with your teammates' curses, just made it absolutely game defining, and it makes sense that they got rid of it. I think something got kind of messed up with their coding where it wasn't supposed to be stacking with your teammate, and that's why they ended up having to actually get rid of it. And maybe it can come back one day, and if it does, then Doomsayer will definitely be pretty strong. I will say if Plaguebearer ever comes back, then I actually think this one was kind of weak, as the health you gained from it was relatively slow. If you again had somebody else stacking it with you, then it was really powerful. It took you forever to reach like really high levels of health. Like for instance, there's that one augment, Celestial Body, where you just get 1,250 health, and Plaguebearer, it took like 6 or 5 rounds until you were actually able to get that 1,250 health, which it would finally make it as good as the gold augment. Sure, you don't have the same cost, where you don't have the 10% less damage, but a Prismatic Augment should definitely do a lot more things because there's so many items that do % health damage and a lot of champions that do % health damage and some augments that do % health damage. Just stacking all this health, it didn't feel that good. I'm going to put Plaguebearer actually in kind of troll because I do think it was pretty weak in the way it was supposed to be used, because again, you have to remember that you have this little augment where you're running next to people just getting like slowly stacking more health, while everybody else has these crazy augments where they can just quickly kill you, which means that you're not even stacking Plaguebearer that much because somebody's like chain lightninging you for 1,000,000 damage, or blade waltzing you down, and all of these other things, or like doing 35% increased damage with Back to Basics, where if you're just playing a tank with like 300 more health, you're not really going to live against somebody with a good Prismatic. Now, if you fully disagree where I put Plaguebearer, then I fully encourage you to take the augment and prove me wrong. But sadly, Riot has decided you can't do that anymore. So for now, it's going to stay in kind of troll. The next new augment we have is Draw Your Sword, where you become melee, modifying your attack range to 200 units. And additionally, you gain 35% bonus attack damage, 25% bonus attack speed, 35% bonus health, 25% bonus movement speed, and 25% lifesteal, and these bonuses are increased by 0 to 30% based on attack range. Now, I've actually taken this augment, I think 3 to 4 times, no, probably 3 times, all on Jhin, and this augment is really good. I'd put this in the OP or useless tier because it definitely does change the playstyle where you're then forced to be like up front and center on the enemies. But actually with this like 25% lifesteal and 35% bonus health, you are pretty tanky. And with a 25% bonus movement speed, especially on a champion like Jhin, you can actually kite pretty well still, even though you're melee. Jhin is also really, really fast when he gets his crits as he gets more movement speed, even though they did nerf that a little bit because it was ridiculously overpowered. I think 2 things that are super underrated about Draw Your Sword is the fact that you become melee. So all of the items which just work better on melee champions, you can now build on a ranged champion and get the full value of it. So I was oftentimes building Eclipse because it is a lot weaker on ranged champions, but because you're all of a sudden melee, you're getting like the full benefit of Eclipse, which is nice. I was also building like Ravenous Hydra because that one is also nerfed for range champions, but draw your sword, it doesn't matter anymore. Another funny interaction, you get draw your sword as well as scoped weapons, which will then give you the bonus range as if you were a melee champion. So then you have all of these benefits of draw your sword, but you also still are able to kite because you have this extra range thanks to the scoped weapons, which is a really incredible and powerful combo that I also was able to get like 2 times on Jin, so not that rare to see. The only reason I don't think it's a game-defining augment is because you are forced to play front and center. So if the enemies do have like a lot of CC and are able to pin you down, then that can be rather scary. And I do think I was spoiled a bit by playing it on Jin, as he did utilize a lot of these stats really, really well, as he does have a ton of attack damage, so getting 35% bonus is really nice. And just having that extra lifesteal where you're just healing so much on each auto attack was also really good. Also pretty sure I built like Heartsteel in a couple of games with Draw Your Sword, because getting like the bonus health early is really nice because your Heartsteel damage will be higher, and that means you'll be gaining more health quickly. They can become quite scary and like face tank everybody with all this extra damage thanks to all the buffs Draw Your Sword gives you. The next one we have is Earthwake, and what that does is that when you dash or blink with an ability, it causes you to leave behind a trail from the cast location that detonates after 0.7 seconds, and it deals up to 125 to 1,255 damage based on level, plus 93% of your bonus AD, plus 51% of your AP as physical damage to enemies hit. The fact that it's physical damage does diminish it, but this damage is pretty ridiculously high. Now the damage actually used to be even higher, where it was 150 to 1,500 damage based on level, plus 112% of your bonus AD, and plus 62.5% of your AP, where you would actually get like one shot with Earthwake, which was just absolutely incredible. Back when the damage was that high, I definitely put in the game defining tier, but now that tanks are more prevalent and the damage is a bit lower, I'm going to put it in the OP or useless category. In the early to mid game, this augment is very powerful and it is really good against squishies. The only problem is the damage can be kind of dodged if they're able to escape the 0.75 second window. And also if you're playing against tanks, they're able to like CC and pin you down, maybe the Earthwake won't be enough damage for you to actually win, as if they have like a decent amount of armor, then they will be not taking that much damage from Earthwake. But it is definitely still very, very powerful. Second one is way better if you have multiple abilities with dashes or blinks, or even an ability with like multiple dashes and blinks. Like for instance, again, I'm bringing back Silas, but Silas, his first E and his second E, I think procs 2 instances of Earthwake, and his W also procs an instance of Earthwake. Another champion I see that's really good with this is like Rakan, where his W will proc it, and then his E can proc it 2 times when you get like 2 E's off on your ally. So that is all very impressive. Also, this augment would be absolutely incredible if you can also get dashing, as this augment works with your dashes and blinks, and dashing makes them have lower CDR, so you can get way more Earthwake procs. But also, this augment just works really well if you get any augments that buff your CDRs on the abilities that have the dashes or blinks, because that means you get more Earthwake procs. This augment can still struggle pretty heavily against the champions that have a bunch of on-hit damage, because you might actually do 0 damage with it if they're able to keep you at bay, if they're able to kite you, and just one-shot you with how much damage they do. Next augment we have is Eureka, where you gain ability haste equal to 25% of your AP. And when this augment first came out, it actually was a nerfed version where it would only give you ability haste equal to 20% of your AP. And this augment is really powerful if you can like reach the 1000 AP threshold, because 25% of that would be 250 ability haste, which is quite nice. The problem is, unless you're playing a champion like Veigar, it's pretty hard to actually reach super duper high levels of AP, especially because in the early stages of the game, you're going to be struggling, as you do have a weaker augment compared to everybody else, as you do need to be building up a ton of AP in order to really benefit from Eureka, as it doesn't do any extra damage on its own, and it doesn't really help you stack your AP by itself. But if you do, for instance, have an augment that you can stack AP, like Phenomenal Evil, then Eureka is absolutely broken. So I'm going to end up putting this in the can be strong but very niche tier. If you already have a bunch of ability power, then taking this as like a 3rd or 4th augment can feel very impactful, as it will just give you a bunch of ability haste so you can spam a bunch of your AP. That means I'm not going to put it any higher, because it doesn't really help you from getting one shot if somebody is super duper strong, or if you're playing against somebody who's like super duper tanky, then you can still maybe struggle to kill them, as it doesn't give you any extra damage except for the fact that you're able to spam more abilities. It's still a very good augment. It definitely has a lot of potential in the late game, but you might actually end up getting eliminated before you get to reap the rewards of Eureka, because for instance, if you only have 300 ability power, then you would only get 75 ability haste from a Prismatic Augment, and there's that one gold augment that already gives you like 60 ability power, so you don't want a Prismatic that's barely better than a gold augment. The next augment we have is Feel the Burn, which replaces your Flee with Feel the Burn. And what this does is it allows you to cast both Exhaust and Ignite on all enemy champions with 1,000 units. The slow on Exhaust, it says, has its power increased by 50%, and the damage on Ignite is also increased. Now, the best benefits of this augment are the fact that you get the reduced damage from Exhaust, which is 35%, and you get the Grievous Wounds proc from having Ignite. That being said, just getting Exhaust and Ignite for a Prismatic Augment feels kind of bad. I mean, again, just compare it to all other Prismatic Augments. They just do a lot more, in my opinion. This augment is good if you're playing against somebody who really wants to one-shot you, like a Zed, a Syndra, a Kennen, that have like really big ultimates that are going to go in, that are pretty telegraphed that you can see, and then you can have a really clutch Exhaust to help you survive against that one instance of damage. But in most cases in Arena, you are dying to on hit, or you're just getting run over by tanks with a lot of CC, where Exhaust and Ignite will be almost useless, and you would actually just rather have Flee at that point to have that more CDR to escape. Honestly, I'm almost tempted to put it in the kind of troll tier. I might end up putting it near the bottom of the useful but kind of weak, as it always will have some kind of use, but it just won't be that impressive compared to other Prismatics. Next up, we have Fey Magic, and what this does is when you damage enemies with your ultimate ability, it polymorphs them into harmless critters for 2 seconds, during which their base movement speed is reduced by 60, and it disarms them for the same duration. So, dealing damage with your ultimate polymorphs people, and this is a very funny concept. I've seen it maybe once in all of my games, but even then, it didn't really seem to be working that effectively. You can like kind of also like dodge people's ultimates sometimes if they're skill shots. You would want to play this on a champion that has like a relatively low CDR ultimate, as the augment itself has 15-second cooldown. Finding a champion with like low CDR but still like fits in this 15-second realm is kind of ridiculous, especially because a lot of fights won't last longer than 15 seconds. So pretty much what you're getting is like one instance of polymorph after you ult. But again, like, I don't really understand who is taking this. Like, if you're playing a tank, all of your ultimates are pretty much CC abilities, so you don't really need to further CC them because they'll already be CC'd by your ultimate. Like, if you're playing like an Amumu with his ult, or like Leona with her ult, or Sejuani with her ult, or a Malphite with her ult. Sure, you'll also polymorph them, but they already be CC'd, so it kind of feels like a waste to have them be further CC'd. It also doesn't do any damage. It just like prevents them from doing damage for these 2 seconds. But a lot of times also your ultimate is just like used to finish people off. So for all these reasons, I'm going to put it in the kind of troll tier. I've thought about taking it like on someone like Corki again, because he has that long range ultimate. If you can like keep poking them with your ult, then for a little bit they'll be polymorphed, but they'll just come out of it and then just absolutely clap you because you have a Prismatic that only did a little bit of something for like one instance, and then they'll have some other augment that will just absolutely crush you. The next augment we have is one that I'm kind of conflicted on, which is Giant Slayer. And what it does is you become tiny, reducing your size by 75% and gain 30% bonus movement speed. And additionally, you deal increased bonus damage against enemy champions with greater size than you. The reason why I'm conflicted with Giant Slayer is because sometimes the damage it'll report will be absolutely insane, and sometimes it'll be like literally nothing, even though you are clearly smaller than people. So I don't know if like it's the tooltip being wrong, or I don't really know how they're categorizing when champions are small, medium, large, or extra large. That being said, reducing your size by 75% is actually pretty ridiculous, and gaining that 30% bonus movement speed on top of that really helps you like kite away from people and avoid skill shots. So if you're playing against somebody who has a bunch of those, then Giant Slayer actually is pretty decent as a way to make your hitbox really small so that you can't be that affected by people. I'm gonna put this augment in the OP or useless tier near the bottom. I think it's best on the champions that can abuse on hit, especially from far away, like with good range, because it can help you really kite people. Like I was playing it on Varus, and we were playing against somebody who was abusing the double curse stacking method and just had a bunch of health. but I was able just to kite them so well by being small that they weren't able to hit me, and I was able to just dodge all of their CC. So in that case, Giant Slayer was the perfect rune for me. But it honestly is more of a sign that on hit is so powerful that you can use an augment that sometimes just doesn't seem to do too much to really help you win. I will say that in theory you should always be doing at least 10% more damage to people because you are 75% smaller than them, which is quite nice. It's nothing too incredible. Doing 15% and 25% is also okay. Doing that 30% is really, really nice, but there aren't going to be too many instances where that actually comes up. I'll definitely say I've seen a lot of melee champions taking Giant Slayer, and I'm less impressed by it because they have to be like up front and central with you, so they can't actually utilize the smaller size to juke things as well, because if I'm playing a champion with like a point and click CC, it doesn't really matter how small they are, because unless they're actually able to dodge my mouse when I spam my point and click spell, then I'll be able to catch them. Now, funnily enough, we have the augment that in theory should be completely countered by Giant Slayer, which is Goliath, where you're granted 35% bonus health, 15% adaptive force, and 50% increased size. Now, this is historically one of my all-time favorite augments, and it is still to this day, but I still think it is just consistently good. Honestly, getting that 35% bonus health is pretty ridiculous, especially because every champion just has more health in Arena, thanks to the Arena stat adjustments, so definitely do not sleep on this. This augment is amazing if you're playing a Heartsteel tank, because again, getting that bonus health means that you'll be able to stack your Heartsteel faster and sooner, which does really add up. It does kind of suck that Giant Slayer, in theory, really does counter you, and oftentimes when I take Goliath, the whole lobby ends up getting Giant Slayer, or like the max amount of people get Giant Slayer. But that being said, I don't really notice the damage too much. This augment is also really nice on bruisers as they get that adaptive force, and it isn't even bad on certain like ADCs, as just getting like extra bonus health and extra adaptive force can be quite good, especially if you're building like a lot of AD or if you're building like a lot of AP. This one could actually be sneaky good on someone like Veigar because you're just getting 15% more ability power, which would really stack up if you have a ton of ability power. So definitely something to consider. This augment is truly the definition of consistently good. It is a great option to take, but it's nothing that seems too OP in any game that you play. The next augment we have is Infernal Conduit, where your abilities apply a burn for 5 seconds. That deals some base damage, and then it also scales with 2.8% of your bonus AD and 6% of your bonus magic damage. And it is better, as it used to only scale with plus 2% of your AP, so a big buff to mages, which is definitely deserved, as in the past, whenever I saw this augment, it didn't really seem to be doing that much damage. And Riot seems to agree as they gave it 4% more, which is a lot more than the initial 2%. Now, this burn stacks infinitely and refreshes with each application, so it just is going to keep getting stronger and stronger and stronger as the fight goes on for longer. And then it says that additionally, all of your burn augments, so if you get Firebrand, Infernal Conduit, Slow Cooker, and Tormentor, any of these augments will reduce the cooldown of all your basic abilities by 0.08 seconds for each tick of their damage over time effects. And I believe in the text of the augment in the actual game, it might also work on your burn damage items, but I'm not fully sure about that. Again, it's kind of sad that the websites don't have the most information about it. This augment for me is going to be in the OP or useless tier. If you're playing a mage that has like a lot of burn damage already, then Infernal Conduit is just even better and can really help you deal with these super duper high HP tanks. That will be a big problem for you sometimes. Now, this next augment is one that I placed super duper high last year, and that is Jeweled Gauntlet, where your abilities can critically strike for 140% damage, and additionally you gain 20% plus 5% AP critical strike chance. And it's important that mages are able to get this plus 5% AP critical strike chance, because a lot of their items don't have a critical strike chance except for the one. And this augment is truly the definition of OP or useless, because in the early game when you don't have a lot of crit, then oftentimes this augment will do absolutely nothing because you won't actually get that ability to critically strike, and even when it does, it won't do that much damage because you don't have a lot of AP. But in the late game, if you're able to stack a bunch of ability power, then this augment becomes absolutely broken, because you can literally one-shot people if you have the right kind of builds, but it just takes a very long time for you to eventually actually reach that point. and you can still struggle against the super duper tanky champions, as you might not be able to one-shot them with Jeweled Gauntlet and they might be able to run you down. But against squishy targets in the super duper late game, then Jeweled Gauntlet is just absolutely amazing. You can literally get a full team wipe if both of the targets are squishy, because very few champions are able to survive an ability that is really strong, especially when it can critically strike for 140% damage. Again, the reason why I don't have it in the game-defining tier anymore is just because the prevalence of tanks have gone way up with a ton of Heartsteel stacks, and Jeweled Gauntlet just isn't as strong against those targets. The next augment we have is a very visually pleasing one in Laser Eyes, where you continuously fire a laser in a line 700 units from your facing direction, dealing 5 to 60 based on level, plus 14% AD, plus 9% AP magic damage every 0.25 seconds to enemies in its width of 80 units. And pretty much if you get this augment on a frontliner in the early game, you will win every single round, as the damage this augment does is absolutely ludicrous. Now, that being said, I'm actually going to put in the OP early, mid tier, and meh late, because in the late game, there's a good chance enemies will actually be able to kite away from the Laser Eyes, or even if they get hit by it, it just won't do enough damage in the later stages of the game for you to win those rounds. And as a Prismatic, it really does fall off in the later stages of the game, in my opinion. This augment doesn't help you survive if somebody just is able to one-shot you, if you're playing, like, again, one of those really strong on-hit champions. Like, if they're able to 100 to 0 you in, like, 3 seconds, then it doesn't really matter that you had your Laser Eyes on them, as you will be dead. Now we have Mad Scientist returning, where at the start of each combat round, you either gain 30% bonus attack damage, 20% bonus health, and 30% increased size, or 70 ability haste, 30% bonus movement speed, and 30% reduced size. And honestly, I think this augment is kind of troll. I mean, it is definitely good, but the two different forms feel kind of bad. Like, if you're playing a more tanky bruisery style, you definitely always want the first form more often. And if you're playing like a squishier target that wants to like kite a bunch, you definitely want the second form. Honestly, to me, Mad Scientist is just the worst version of Goliath, as it gives you less percent bonus health, literally 15% less. And while it can potentially give you a lot more attack damage, it is only bonus attack damage, while Adaptive Force, I believe, does scale with like your base AD, for instance, or if you're playing like a champion that builds AP, then Goliath is just better in general. And then the second part of Mad Scientist, where you're smaller, I think it's just a worse version of Giant Slayer, as you do get the same bonus movement speed, but you get way less reduced size, and you do gain 70 ability haste, but that's again kind of similarly to a gold augment, which is decent. But just because you can't rely on this augment to do one or the other really sucks, because with Goliath you can build a specific way where you can like concentrate on having items that give you like health as well as like AD or AP, because Goliath will buff both of those. But you can't really do that with Mad Scientist, because maybe you just get the other form and then you're kind of trolling your build in that case. So I'm not really a big fan of a Prismatic Augment where you can feel kind of shafted on RNG. And again, the bonuses you get from this augment just aren't that incredible. Now we have another augment that I rated super duper highly in the past in Master of Duality, where your basic attacks grant you 6 to 18 based on level ability power, and ability hits grant you 3 to 9 based on level bonus attack damage. And this effect stacks infinitely until the end of the round. Now, this augment is absolutely insane on those on-hit champions that I keep raving about, like your Varus, like your Kael, like your Kaisa. And if you're able to hit the champions a bunch of times without dying, then you're going to definitely win the round. And that's why I think it's an OP early to mid-tier augment and kind of meh late, because that is kind of the problem with it. If you're able to hit somebody a bunch of times, you can get a ton of ability power, and you're definitely going to win the round. Kind of similarly to Accelerating Sorcery, where you have to kind of be able to scale up during the round itself, which is kind of difficult to do. And just in the later stages of the game, the on-hit damage is just absolutely so ridiculous that you really don't need Master of Duality to win. If you already get like 10 autos off, you're kind of already winning already. And sure, that could in theory be like 180 extra ability power, but oftentimes I'd rather just have another augment which will more easily help me actually get those autos off than having Master of Duality. If you were truly only playing against Omega tanks that you kind of struggled to kill, but they couldn't ever really kill you, then Master of Duality is absolutely incredible. But oftentimes, like I've been saying, the on-hit damage is already enough shred for you to actually get through those really ridiculous tanks, where you don't need Master of Duality on top of that. And against assassins or any champion that are trying to like one-shot you, then Master of Duality really doesn't do anything for you, as you have to be able to hit them in order to gain these buffs. And if you're facing against somebody like who has Jeweled Gauntlet, for instance, then maybe you get like one auto off before you just get one shot, and in that case, this augment just doesn't do anything for you. Next one we have is Mystic Punch, where basic attacks reduce your total cooldowns by 1.25 seconds. And this augment, once again, I'm going to be putting the OP early to mid game and meh late game. This augment is kind of confusing because it is decent on tanks, but they also kind of have lower attack speed where they won't be able to benefit from it too much. A lot of times you're actually going to get kited pretty well, where you won't be able to weave in that many auto attacks to actually get your CDRs lower. Also in the game, there's just increased tenacity, so you can't really stun lock people as easily. I know the dream is like be playing Leona and you're like E, auto Q them, and then you're able to get like another E off so that you can constantly keep them in this stun lock, but they'll be getting more and more and more tenacity the way Arena works, where they don't want you to be permanently stunned, which is pretty smart. I can see this augment being pretty decent on those on-hit champions if they do want to weave in some abilities. I think this would work on your ultimate, so that could be pretty good. Honestly, I haven't taken this augment too many times, and I haven't seen it being taken that many times. Usually I see it taken on like Udyrs and stuff like that, and they do pretty alright with that. Another champion that's pretty decent with this is like a Jax champion, for instance, who he can get his E's more often up. And in those cases, they're definitely going to be decent. But the fact that you actually have to be able to basic attack them in order to benefit from it can kind of suck. And honestly, I think a lot of the damage in the game right now comes more from the items than the champions themselves, which is kind of a problem altogether. And for that reason, I kind of view Mystic Punch not as highly. If this existed in normal League of Legends, it would be absolutely insane. But because, again, I think a lot of the damage does come from items, that I do think this augment is a little bit weaker. The next augment we have is a pretty funny one in Nesting Doll, where upon taking fatal damage for the first time, you enter Resurrection for 1.5 seconds, and are afterwards revived with 65% maximum health, but 35% reduced damage and 80% reduced size. And the next time you take fatal damage, you then enter another Resurrection period, and you are revived with 65% reduced damage and 60% size, as well as 35% of your maximum health, and reviving causes enemy champions to be knocked back. Now this augment is a pretty troll one. It is pretty funny. If you have a ton of maximum health, then this augment is pretty strong, as they have to constantly keep killing you and you keep reviving. And 65% of like 10,000 maximum health would mean 6,500 HP you're reviving with, which is a pretty big deal. So if you're like a champion that relies mostly on like CCing their enemies and stuff like that, and like peeling for your team, the Nesting Doll is pretty good. It also helps you potentially revive your teammates in the early game, and helps you maybe like survive the zone if you want to like cheese enemies in that way. I think this augment is definitely in the OP or useless tier. It's pretty good. I don't think it's really game defining, as you do actually do quite a lot less damage with this 35% reduced damage, and then 65% reduced damage can be very impactful, because when you do respawn, you are a much lesser version of yourself. It could mean that when you're revived, you can't actually overcome like an enemy's healing, for example, just because you do so much less damage, that they'll just be able to lifesteal tank you in the later stages of your forms, which definitely does suck. Also, if you're playing like a squishier target and you just keep getting one shot, there is that potential that they kill you. You get in that Nesting Doll form, and then they just instantly kill you again, because once you have less health, it'll be even easier for them to kill you. So that can be another problem, especially because it is a Prismatic Augment. So like if you're dying to someone, for instance, with Jeweled Gauntlet, using their spells to just one-shot you, there's nothing really stopping them from just continuously one-shotting you when you keep respawning with less maximum health. Now the next augment we have is Omni Soul, which I absolutely trashed last time it was in the game. I believe they have tried to buff the Dragon Souls, but nah, I'm going to put this in the kind of troll tier. Dragon Souls just aren't strong enough to really be a Prismatic Augment, even if you give somebody 3 of them. The Dragon Souls as silver augments are already kind of weak. I mean, the best one is Ocean Soul, but with getting Omni Soul, there's no guarantee you actually get good Dragon Souls. Like, for instance, in one game, I got Chemtech Soul, Cloud Soul, and Mountain Dragon Soul. So it was literally like I was down a whole prismatic augment compared to everybody else, or just had like 3 really terrible silver augments when everybody else had really good prismatic augments. But thankfully I was playing Kaisa, which is just a really OP champion, so it didn't matter and we still won. Honestly, even if you were able to pick your 3 souls that you end up getting, like Hextech, Dragon Soul, Infernal Soul, and Ocean Soul, it wouldn't even be that crazy because these souls all have like cooldowns on them for their effects oftentimes, at least like the Hextech Dragon Soul for instance. And they can just be countered so easily with like Healing Cut. I just don't really understand why this is a prismatic augment. Honestly, I could even see them giving you like every single Dragon Soul and it wouldn't even be that incredibly crazy OP in my opinion. Like you might think like, what? You can't even imagine having every single Dragon Soul. But like what's really the difference between having 3 and having all 6? Because like, honestly, the souls themselves aren't that strong. And again, I believe they are buffed a little bit in Arena to try and make them actually playable. But I still think this augment is just absolutely terrible. Next augment we have is a really cool new one, which is Orbital Laser, which replaces your Flea with this ability called Orbital Laser. And what it does is it calls upon an, okay, I'm going to say it another time, Orbital Laser to fire down on the target location after 2.5 seconds, which immediately deals true damage equal to 20% of the target's maximum health, kind of like a redemption effect. And then it deals 40 to 120 based on level magic damage every 0.5 seconds over 3 seconds to enemies within a 550 radius. Now this augment I'm going to put in the kind of troll tier because you're going to fixate your gameplay around trying to get the Orbital Laser damage to work. And it just doesn't do that much damage against squishies because it's doing maximum health damage, which isn't as important on squishy targets. And then on tanks, it doesn't do enough damage after the fact for it to really matter. You're kind of giving up a lot in order to do mediocre things because you have to give up your Flea and you have to give up the potential of having any other prismatic augment. Now, they did realize how terrible this augment was, I think, because they did try buffing it. The damage per tick is now 40 to 120 per level, which is better, I guess. But again, because everybody's so tanky, it doesn't really matter. Also, the damage isn't instant. You also have to target it, and you have to hope they stay in that area for 2.5 seconds. So if they have flash, then it can just completely nullify your whole prismatic augment. They have that one like silver augment that gives them 3 flashes and they'll never ever get hit by your Orbital Laser, which just absolutely sucks. And because there's just so many conditions for you to actually get Orbital Laser to work, and their payout isn't even like instantly winning the round, it's just kind of like doing a decent amount of damage in the round but not a crazy amount. This augment is honestly pretty troll if you do end up taking it. You can maybe win some early game rounds with this because you can get the zone to be smaller and then it's easier to land the Orbital Laser, but at the same time it's kind of hard to survive until that point because again you are down a prismatic augment if you are holding it the entire time. Now thankfully we already talked about Plaguebearer, so we can talk about Quantum Computing, which is another damaging augment where you automatically slash in a circle around you over 0.75 seconds, and afterwards you deal 120 to 300 based on level, plus 100% bonus AD, plus 60% AP physical damage to enemies on the outer edge, and it has a 10-second cooldown. Now I honestly love Quantum Computing because it looks so absolutely cool. Pretty much every 10 seconds you get this like really big looking Camille ult effect around you, where I think it does more damage on the outer circle, which isn't mentioned here, and it also has the potential to heal you, I believe, as when you hover over it, it tells you the healing it has done. So again, I'm sad it doesn't list all of the things it does on here. Again, all of the numbers that I'm seeing could be wrong. It's not really something I can control, as this is just the best place I've found to look at the augments, so just keep that in mind. That being said, I take this augment way too often, and it will do very well for you in the early to mid stages of the game because being like a tank, for instance, and just getting this extra damage will really surprise people. It's not that difficult to land because the area of effect is quite large. It's a fun little mini game to try and get them on the outer edges of it, as I do believe that is better for the augment. Again, I'm not exactly sure. Maybe that's how you end up actually healing people, is if you do get them on the outer end of it. But yeah, I do actually think it's more like a Camille W, but like in a big circle around you. So like Camille W also has better effects if you hit them from the further distance on you. And unlike something like Orbital Laser, it just will always kind of work, which is nice. And it's not something that you can avoid as easily. Now, the damage itself does really start to fall off in the later stages of the game. The fact that it scales with 60% AP is pretty good. If you can like play like a tankier style champ and then also build some AP, it wouldn't be bad. If you can get that one silver augment that lowers the cooldowns of all your automatic augments, and quantum computing would be a lot better. But I just think it does fall off a bit too much in the later stages of the game, where again, you're just getting one shot by all these like on-hit champions or just people who hit better prismatic augments. Then we have our final quest and only prismatic quest augment in quest Wooglet's Witchcap, where you gain a needlessly large rod, but instead of giving you 6 AP, it actually gives you 100 AP. And once you have that item in your inventory, which you'll automatically get, as well as a Rabadon's Death Cap and a Zhonya's Hourglass, it turns all 3 of those items into Wooglet's Witchcap, which gives you 300 ability power, 20 ability haste, and 50 armor, as well as giving you increased ability power by 50%, and gives you the Zhonya's effect. Now, this augment on mages is consistently good. If I'm playing a mage, I'm almost always taking this when I see it. Just the fact that you can get 50% increased ability power, which is better than the Rabadon's Death Cap giving you 40% increased ability power. The fact that it gives you instantly 100 ability power isn't bad. And the fact that it combines all of these items to only take up 1 inventory slot, which means you can build even more AP items later on in the game, is just really strong. Now, the only reason I don't have it higher is because that's pretty much all it does, is give you like the potential to build more ability power. So it doesn't have the same high highs as other augments, but it is still very good. And all 3 of these augments in the consistently good tier have a great potential to actually outperform anything above it. I just think it doesn't have the same like high highs as the ones above it, which you really want from Prismatic Augment. Because at the end of the day, you still are playing a mage, and you do have to build these specific items until you actually get the full benefit from this augment. So it could delay like your Liandry's, for instance, or you could delay your augment if you want to go for Liandry's, as that is the best AP item if you have to deal with tanks. And this item just doesn't do really anything to help you against those tanks in general. So for those reasons, it does sometimes struggle. I will say Riot has done an amazing job with the new prismatic augments, making them really cool, because now we have Raid Boss, which again is one of my favorite augments, where at the start of each combat round, you are imprisoned in the center of the battlefield for 9 seconds, becoming suppressed in the duration, which means you can't do anything, you just kind of have to watch what happens. And while imprisoned, you gain up to 0 to 85% based on missing health, damage reduction, and increases your attack damage, ability power, maximum health, and size by 60% over the duration. And afterwards, or upon being damaged to 50% maximum health, you are set free, knocking back all nearby enemies and losing the damage reduction, but keeping the other bonuses until the end of the round. And additionally, you heal for 30% missing health and receive a shield that absorbs damage equal to 40% maximum health. Now, that is a ton of words to pretty much just say that you are Omega strong. The problem with this augment is that they can just ignore the raid boss in the middle and go for your teammate, and if they're able to catch them, that means you're pretty much guaranteed to be in a 2v1, and hopefully you are strong enough. This augment, funnily enough, is actually really strong if you're playing with a bard teammate, because he can use his ultimate on top of you so that the enemies can't damage you, because another strategy they can go for is just to try to pump as much damage on you as possible, because if they can get you to below 50% maximum health, you're not going to get the full 60% extra attack damage, ability power, and maximum health. It's going to stop at whatever you were able to reach. So again, the on-hit champions are really good against raid boss, or like people who are able to do true damage in any way, because then it won't be affected by this damage reduction, which is really incredible, the damage reduction, unless of course you are facing true damage, like a Brand or like a Vayne W, which can actually shred through you. I actually don't know if Brand does true damage, it just feels like it. I guess he just does percent health damage, but like him being able to pump all of his spells on you would be really annoying. I'm going to put this augment in the OP or useless tier, because when it works out really well. You do feel like an absolute raid boss. You do feel really strong. This augment's really good if you're playing like a Heartsteel character, because it does benefit a lot from your maximum health stats, as you gain up to like 60% maximum health. It also, like, the more maximum health you have, the harder it is for them to pop you. You also heal for 30% of your missing health, and you also gain a shield equal to 40% of your maximum health. So just health stacking is really good with raid boss. That being said, max health is really bad against people who build a lot of on-hit damage that does well against maximum health. So there is that little bit of a game you have to play. But if you are playing against a team that doesn't have a lot of percent max health damage, then Raid Boss is absolutely incredible. It should help you win a lot of fights very easily. Now we have another new augment in Scopiest Weapons, which is just a buffed version of Scoped Weapons, the gold augment. And this gives melee characters 250 extra bonus attack range and ranged characters 150 bonus attack range. And I actually think this augment, while being very boring, is pretty game defining because, once again, I think the items just really do way too much damage in Arena, and being able to play a ranged character where you can use your item damage from further away to actually just like win fights without ever being hit is a very powerful thing indeed. Now you might not believe me that Scopiest Weapons would actually be that good, but let's say in theory you're playing one team having a Varus with Scopiest Weapons and one team having a Varus with Master of Duality. Well, potentially if both people are hitting them at the same time, the Master of Duality Varus is going to do way better. But the Varus with Scopiest Weapons will be able to just keep the other Varus further away from them, be able to get more hits in earlier, and has the potential to almost like one-shot or kill them before they get any auto attacks really off, which does really suck for the Varus with less range. Or just like if you need to kite away from people, then Scopiest Weapons is just absolutely amazing because you can hit people from like over walls, or you can hit people while your main tank or peeler can keep them away from you. So yeah, very boring augment, but sadly very powerful one. And yes, I was actually able to get Draw Your Sword and Scopiest Weapons, which truly made a Jin game very fun, where I was able to swing my sword from miles away and just absolutely bonk people. Now we have Slow Cooker, which surrounds you in flames, causing you to apply a burn every second to enemies within 500 units for 5 seconds. That deals magic damage every second equal to 1.75% of target's maximum health over the duration, and target's maximum health means your maximum health. And this burn stacks infinitely and refreshes with each application. Now when this augment first came out, the damage was actually 0.5% of the target's maximum health, which was quite pitiful. And now it's up to 1.75% of target's maximum health, which is quite powerful. Even back then, when it was rather low, I thought it was a quite powerful augment. I'll be putting this in the OP or useless tier right about here. The problem with Heartsteel tanks oftentimes is that they won't be able to actually kill anybody because sure, they do have a lot of health, but if they're playing against somebody who has a lot of healing, maybe they're able to actually drain tank them. But with Slow Cooker, that will be a lot less easy, as they will actually be able to turn all of their health into damage. The only reason why I don't put it any higher is because if you're playing against those ranged champions, again, that can do a ton of damage based on your maximum health, then you could struggle with the Slow Cooker, as you might not be able to get on top of them for long enough to deal enough damage to them before they actually shut you down. Now we have Spellwake, which is a modification of Earthwake, where instead of using a dash, you can now hit an enemy champion with an ability, which sends a trail from your location to where they were hit, which will detonate in a 100 radius after 0.75 seconds to deal up to 70 to 700 base on level, plus 100% bonus AD, plus 70% AP magic damage to enemies within 1.5 seconds. And this augment's really good on champions with a lot of abilities that are like skill shots from long range. A champion like Lux is really good with this because if she can snare her enemy, she can pretty much guarantee that they also take the damage from the Spellwake. She can also use it on her E to try and proc it. She can also use it on her ultimate to try and hit people with the Spellwake damage, which is pretty decent. A champion like Ezreal can maybe be interesting if you can like constantly hit Qs. Maybe then you can get a bunch of Spellwake procs on them, making it so that when they then try to walk towards you, they're taking all of this damage from Spellwake. And I'm going to put this in the OP or useless tier, right about here. And I'm going to put this in the OP or useless tier right about here. The only problem I have with it is that the damage can feel a bit pitiful sometimes against tanks if they are able to get on top of you, if they are able to CC you. The damage can also be juked if people are fast enough, if they're able to move left or right, so you might actually hit them from far away, but then they might actually take the Spellwake damage if you didn't actually CC them in any way, as it does have a 0.75 channel time. That being said, if you're playing like some kind of fancy combo, like with an Amumu for instance, or a Jarvan where you can keep them trapped and then do this Spellwake damage, then you can see that this augment is very powerful and does deal a ton of damage. You do have to hit the enemies though in order to get the Spellwake proc, so if you're missing all of your abilities, then Spellwake won't do absolutely anything, which is different than Earthwake, as you just have to do the dash in order to actually get the spell damage effect off. but it is definitely a very strong augment, but sometimes it's going to let you down if you aren't clutch with your abilities. Now we have the augment Spirit Link, which I rated super duper highly in the past because what it did, it redirected 40% of the damage dealt to your ally to you, and you healed yourself equal to 40% of the healing they receive. And now it's all the way down to 15%, and you heal yourself equal to 50% of the healing they receive, so you do get more healing, but they really nerfed the amount of damage that is actually dealt to you instead of your teammate. Some cases actually not that bad because your ally would take a ton of damage, but instead you would just end up getting like one shot because of the Spirit Link. So in those cases, it's okay. But now that tanks are just more tanky in general, as they just have a bunch of health, it would be nice if Spirit Link was back to that 40% to keep your squishy targets alive. Honestly, I haven't seen too many people take this at the moment. I'm going to put in the can be strong but very niche tier. If you're playing around a character that has like a ton of healing, this could be good, like a Warwick, for instance, or maybe a Gwen, because then you'll be healing as well. Or if you're just like really worried about somebody getting relatively one shots and you want to try to keep them alive, then Spirit Link can be nice. But now with Prismatic Augments, I think there's just enough options where both members can be really powerful instead of like super buffing one person. Sure, Raid Boss, you're like super buffing one person, but you're like really, really buffing that person. While Spirit Link, you're just kind of keeping them a little bit more alive and giving you a bit more sustain. So it's kind of like a glorified Knight's Vow, which I don't think is that powerful. But it can be really strong if you're like one teammate is really, really, really powerful, because Spirit Link is one of the best ways to keep them alive. Now we have the Augment Summoner's Roulette, which replaces your summoner spells with random ones, and after using a summoner spell in combat, replace it with another random one on a 6-second cooldown. Now initially I thought this augment was absolutely terrible because the thought of just having flash and then sometimes ignite and then sometimes exhaust and sometimes ghost didn't seem that strong, but you can actually get really good summoners like Kindred Ult, which is one of the better ones you see, but it's kind of RNG. You don't know exactly what you're going to get. I'm going to put Summoner's Roulette in the useful but kind of weak tier. Yes, it can be useful to get Flash Ghosts in some scenarios, but is it that strong where it's worth a Prismatic Augment slot? I had a Bard that took it, and honestly, I don't think we want another round after that, because let's be real, let's say you do get that Kindred Ult, then it's just as good as a Gold Augment in that one instance, and you can't really plan around it because you don't know you're going to get it. You just end up getting like useless summoner spells in the scenario. Already you have like Silver Augments that kind of buff your summoner spells, and they aren't that incredible, so having a Prismatic Augment that increases your summoner spell effectiveness doesn't really impress me, I'll be honest. So yeah, I'm going to put in the useful because sure, you can get some good summoner spells, but it definitely does not excite me as much as any other Prismatic Augment. Now, if you watch my other tier list, you know how much I trash the other Keystone runes, and this one is Symphony of War, where you get the Conqueror and Lethal Tempo Keystone runes, and it's definitely the best one by far, but is it really worthy of having a Prismatic Augment slot? It kind of has the same problem with Master of Duality, where you actually have to hit people in order to start stacking your Lethal Tempo and Conqueror. And even when you do have it fully stacked, is it that strong? Wouldn't you rather just like hit them from further away, or just have the potential to deal like 30% more damage based on Giant Slayer? The healing you get from Conqueror isn't too crazy. The damage as well isn't that amazing. And the extra attack speed you get from Lethal Tempo as well is not as good, especially when you compare it to like the next augment that we're about to talk about. So yeah, Symphony of War, it's definitely like a useful Prismatic Augment. It's one you'll see a lot of people take, but honestly, it definitely does not have the same high highs as other augments. Once again, just getting these two keystones doesn't really make you that much more powerful. It can kind of be okay in the earlier stages of the game, but definitely in the late game, it falls off a lot more than some of the other augments. Now we have Tap Dancer, which is an augment I originally didn't think was that strong. But with the augment, your basic attacks grant you 10 bonus movement speed, which stacks infinitely until the end of the round. And additionally, you gain bonus attack speed equal to 10% movement speed. And if you are able to hit somebody several times with this, then you can get to the point where you can actually just kite them to the point where they can never ever reach up to you unless they spend their flash. And you can actually just like pretty much instantly win certain rounds with Tap Dancer. I'm going to put this in the OP or useless tier right up here. This augment is absolutely insane on someone like Kale, on someone like Kaisa, because they're already champions that are pretty fast with their W and their E, so they're gaining extra attack speed because of those. and it can really lead to them just getting so much attack speed, which then leads them to them getting so much movement speed. We're just never going to be able to catch them if they actually do get a certain amount of stacks. I do think it's worse than Scopiest Weapons because I think that's more consistently good, as they can do damage more early on. They still have to be close enough where they can get these autos off, so maybe you can still blow them up if you do land some really good CC chains or like just damage in general, while Scopiest Weapons is going to be harder to do that because they can hit you from further away. But if they are able to start stacking this extra movement speed in order to then kite you better, then Tap Dancer is really ridiculous. That's why I think it's now better than Master of Duality, as it helps you kite and stay alive so that you can actually do your damage. And attack speed is really all you need in order to do that extra item damage, to do that extra on-hit damage, as then you can get more procs of it off. Another augment I absolutely love, and I take it way too often, is Thief's Glove. What it does, it removes all your current items, and at the start of each combat round, you gain random items instead, with the stats and damage of these items being increased by 30%. You can also actually get Golden Spatula over this, which is kind of fun. But this augment is definitely kind of troll, and honestly, it's because Riot Games will just give you the worst possible items in the last fight that you're about to be eliminated in every single time. I was playing like Sejuani, for instance, and they gave me like just a bunch of random lethality or like actives I couldn't use, or like Heartsteel with 0 stacks for the final fight, which just absolutely sucks. Pretty much the way Thief's Gloves works is that 1 in every 3 rounds you're going to get a really amazing build that you're going to be really strong in, and you're going to be like, oh, I love Thief's Glove, I can't wait to take it another time. But always, you're never going to get that 1 in 3 chance in the final fight. I don't think I've ever really won with Thief's Glove. I think I've always like gotten like around second with it. The best case scenario for Thief's Glove are champions that can use every single stat, like a Shyvana, for instance, who can use AP, can use tank, can use AD pretty effectively. But even then, it's going to give you like Moonstone Renewer without any other like real healing abilities. So that will be a bad combo. So Riot Games will always find a way to make Thief's Gloves a terrible augment, no matter how much I love it. And also to reiterate, because I think the items are so powerful and so impactful in Arena, the fact that you're getting random ones is not very good in the current meta. I just realized all of these final augments are ones we've covered before, so let's breeze through them. Now we have Trueshot Prodigy, where when you damage an enemy from over 700 units away, it automatically casts Ezreal's Trueshot Barrage in their direction, dealing 250 to 750 base on level damage, plus 140% of your bonus AD, and plus 100% AP magic damage to enemies hit on a 5-second cooldown. Now this one I believe is actually pretty OP or useless if you're able to hit enemy champions, and this one's really good. This augment is actually really amazing on like Zyra, Heimerdinger, Shaco, Teemo, any of those trap champions, because as long as you are keeping them far away from you, your traps can actually proc it and it will deal so much damage. The fact that it scales with 100% of your AP is really ridiculous. It will truly do a ton of damage. It has better scaling than Earthwake and Spellwake, which is why I place it higher. It definitely has the potential to be useless though, because if enemies just get on top of you and you can't keep them 700 units away, then Trueshot Prodigy will do absolutely nothing. And 700 units is quite a lot of distance actually, so unless you're able to win a fight relatively quickly with your poke, or just keeping them away with like a peel from your teammate, then Trueshot Prodigy is actually kind of troll. But in the scenarios where you are able to keep them away, then this augment is just absolutely ridiculous and will win you a decent amount of fights. But it is also a bit weaker now that tanks are more meta, because it doesn't do any percent health damage, but it does proc Liandry's for you, which is nice. Now we have Ultimate Revolution, where when you cast your ultimate ability, it resets its cooldown immediately after it starts. And this may only occur once per combat round. And I think this augment is pretty game defining. There are a lot of champions with really powerful ultimates. A lot of like the tanky champions have really good ultimates that have like a lot of CC, where you can just have somebody pretty much not be able to play the game if you get like 2 Amumu ults off, or if you get like 2 Leona ults off. You can even get like 2 Varus ults off, where you'll definitely be able to pretty much shut somebody down. You'd also get like 2 really powerful damaging ultimates off, like 2 Veigar ults will pretty much one-shot anybody who's around 40% health. You could get like 2 Malphite ults, 2 Annie ults. There's just so many powerful ultimates that you would want to back-to-back on, which makes Ultimate Revolution just super duper powerful. Of course, this augment's going to be pretty useless on a lot of champions that don't have insane ultimates, but if you do have one, then Ultimate Revolution is amazing. In a way, you could see Ultimate Revolution being like your ultimate does double damage and gets double effects because you're able to use it back to back, which is pretty ridiculous. And it's definitely best on like the CC ultimates or the point and click ultimates, because then you know you're guaranteeing to get the double benefit. Our final augment is Wisdom of Ages, which grants you simply 1 level and an additional level every other round and removes level cap. And I actually think this augment is the best augment. I've never ever lost with this augment when I've taken it, I believe. Maybe I've gotten like a second once. If you can get this augment first, it's definitely the best time to take it because you get more of the level ups, as I believe you'll get like 1 extra level up than if you end up taking it second round. The reason why this is so powerful is because leveling up your abilities is just really ridiculously good in League of Legends, and you also reach really critical points. Like I believe you reach level 11 before anybody else, and you reach level 16 before anybody else, which means you get higher ranks of your ultimate before anybody else does. And being able to go over the level cap where everybody else will be level 18, when you can reach like level like 24-ish, is really incredible because nobody else is getting stronger, but you're still getting stronger without even having to build like extra items. Also, all the items like scale with like base stats and stuff like that, so just having more AD, having more HP is good for the items. Some items and other augments just scale with level, so having more levels is just better. You can reach like higher levels of Trueshot Prodigy faster. Let's say, for instance, other people are level 15 and you're level 18, you're already getting like 90 extra damage from Trueshot Prodigy just because you have Wisdom of Ages, but like so many augments work like that. And for all those reasons, Wisdom of Ages is really good. You can pretty much take it on any champion, which I really like about it. I do see instances where any of these other augments can be better than Wisdom of Ages, but just because of how versatile it is and how consistent this augment really is, really makes me value it super highly. It can struggle a bit in the early stages of the game. Maybe if you get eliminated too quickly, then you won't see the power of Wisdom of Ages. But if you can reach that late game where the health losses are so much higher, then you'll be really shining by being a higher level than everybody else. Well, this concludes my Prismatic tier list for the augments, and now we've covered all of the augments in Arena. I hope you've enjoyed this little journey. If you did, I hope you leave it a like, maybe consider subscribing. If there's anything else you want me to cover in Arena, I hope you let me know in the comments below. I think I'm going to start working on a champion tier list, which is going to be difficult. I made one in the past when Arena had a different meta, a different style, so I'll definitely have to look at that, definitely revamp a lot of it. And it's going to take a while, but I will definitely be working on it and observing all of the nerfs that are coming into the different champions with the patches. Again, I want to say thank you guys all so much for watching, for being part of this journey, and I want to wish you good luck on your own Arena adventures.